Yeah, thank you, Mark. So the way we're going to go through today is we're going to start by breaking down the email into a couple different sections, and then we'll focus on each section as we go through. So the first section is going to be subject and from. We're going to spend a reasonable amount of time on that because that's the most important area of your email that you need to focus on. Then we'll talk briefly about the salutation, the introduction, what we talk about, or what we refer to as thinking above the fold or above the jump in digital terms. The email body we'll touch on briefly, signature, and then we'll also talk about the effective use of links within an email. Mark, if you want to share a little bit more here about mobile and email and some recent studies that we've done on mobile. There we go, the slide.
Yeah, absolutely. So, mobile and mobile devices are just becoming a much bigger part of everybody's life, and many of you today are watching this webinar on your laptop, your desktop, and in your other hand you're holding a mobile device. So more and more people are reading email and business communications on their mobile devices. So as marketers, we really need to spend a lot more of our cycles on how is the content that we send going to be read and consumed and viewed on mobile devices. So we're gonna dive into that in more detail about how to optimize your content across how it's going to be consumed, including mobile, and that really changes. You send out one email, and it's got to be viewable in Outlook and Gmail across all kinds of different platforms and browsers and AOL and Hotmail, but also on this tiny little screen that people scroll through very quickly as they're in meetings and on the bus and on the subway, and it just really, the perception of your content is very different on that. So it's really going to affect a lot of things about your call to action and your positioning.
Yeah, and I think the takeaway from mobile, which we're going to reinforce throughout the rest of the presentation, the key takeaway relative to mobile at this point is, or you will see, is shorter content and call to actions earlier in the email. So again, we'll go through some specifics here, but those are, if you think of high-level takeaways relative to mobile and mobile design, those two are key things to think about. So let's dive in and start on the subject line and the importance of the subject line. It's the most important component of your email. To give you an idea of the subject, if you think of advertising legend David Ogilvy, one of the more popular ads that was done, the particular lead-in in that particular ad, as an example, most of us have seen this. At 60 miles an hour, the only thing you hear in the new Rolls-Royce is the ticking of the dashboard clock. Allegedly, that was rewritten 104 times, a reasonable amount of time spent just on that intro for that particular ad. Now, it's not an email, but again, similar concept. I mean, the subject and the lead-in is absolutely critical, so that's where you should be spending the majority of your time. Interestingly, some statistics for you. 40% of a reader's decision to open your email is based on the combination of the email subject and the send from. We have some other statistics for you, but that's reasonably important if you think about it. 40%. Just based on the subject line and the send from. 69% of recipients decide whether or not to report your email as spam just based on the subject. So that's based on research from ESPC. So again, pretty interesting, pretty important aspect there when you think about the importance of the email subject. So a few guidelines to think through as we talk through the subject line here. The first is, how much time should you spend on the email subject? One is we recommend the 50-50 rule. And what that means is you should spend half of your time on the subject and the introduction, and the other half of your time on everything else, which includes design, graphics, body, creative, all the other stuff. Half of your time should be spent on the subject and intro. Really key. Then we also, a little tip on what we call the 80-20 rule of email subjects. 8 out of 10 people are going to skim the email subject line. So 40%, as I mentioned previously, make a decision just based on that subject. But 8 out of 10 people are going to skim your email subject line and your from line in their inbox. But typically less than 2 in 10 are going to read the rest or take action. So again, just stressing the importance of your subject line and your lead-in and how important that is to get a good response. So what I'm going to cover now is that some of the top performing and the lowest performing email subjects that we've seen across, these are representative examples here, but across our customer base. And these are all real live, these are real subjects from real email campaigns that you'll see on both the best as well as the not so best ones. And then what we'll do is we'll analyze and give you some analysis on, what are the commonality between the ones that work and the ones that don't work. So if you think of the 9 best performing subjects, and again, this isn't necessarily in the 1, 2, 3 order. These are, 9 or 10 of the top performing overall, okay? So the first is a company, your company, sales and marketing monthly newsletter. That's good because you know very concisely who it's coming from, the company. You know that it's about sales and marketing, and you know that it's got a time. In other words, it's a monthly newsletter. So there's a level of repeatability or a time period associated with it. So short, concise, to the point. I know if I'm an engineering manager, I probably don't care. I know that if I'm getting this and it says sales and marketing and I recognize the company, I know whether or not it's relevant to me. So very, very, that's a very good subject line. Number 2, variation, again, company newsletter, January 2010, with a teaser subject topic. That, again, works reasonably well. The caveat there is the teaser subject in this particular case needs to be pretty short, and hopefully the company name isn't International Business Machines or something very long if you spell that all out. So we'll talk a little bit more about the email subject line length as well as the email subject content. So as long as it can be kept short, that second variation is one that works quite well. The third, webinar or white paper or something, but in this case, webinar and tips to improve email responses. That type of an email structure works quite well. Again, as a recipient, you know it's a webinar, you know that it's about tips, it's about email responses, you know very quickly in 20 or 30 milliseconds of looking at that whether or not it's relevant to you. Number 4, company webinar case studies. Join us February 15th. Again, just a different variation on the above. And I'm using these specific ones about webinar and email responses because clearly those are examples that will relate to hopefully most of our audience here today. But nonetheless, case studies, that's something that, that's a very specific topic where you've got, again, webinar. It's about case studies. You know the date. You know pretty much instantly whether or not that's relevant to you. Number 5, just generally a short, concise, targeted follow-up email from an event. So again, in our case, webinar topic, webinar slides available. That works extremely well. Not a big surprise, obviously, because you've got an event typically and then the follow-up from it. So number 5, the opportunity for you as email senders, not necessarily from a writing perspective, but from a content perspective, is if you have an event and you have a follow-up item right after that event, again, whether it's an email, whether it's a webinar rather, whether it's a lunch and learn event, physical event, whatever, an immediate follow-up right after that generally does extremely well. That's one of the top performing type approaches. Again, not a big surprise, but that's an opportunity to interface with your recipients. Number 6, we have a lot of customers in the business-to-business world that the marketing department will send emails on behalf of their sales representatives. And so when they set that up, and the emails are automatically generated, but it's a personal email or a personalized email from a sales rep. So the send from is the regional sales rep or person representative, and the title might be something along the lines of this week's phone call or this week's meeting. Again, very personalized. It looks like one-on-one correspondence. No graphics or images. It's just a short note in terms of the content inside that. That turns to work quite well. Number 7, 8 customer service tips that work. Again, short, concise. You can see it's going to also add value to the recipient. You're giving or providing, so to speak, some valuable input or information to the recipient as opposed to taking, so to speak. You're really offering free information or assistance to the recipient. Number 8, a reminder, storage survey, your input. So reminders work well typically because a person has already, or the recipient has already done something to be reminded of. But interestingly, on number 8, survey also does well. So when we look at the analysis of the phrases and words that are associated with the top performing emails, we find that the word survey or related to survey does quite well. And finally, number 9, invitation to a particular event. Again, in the case where you can keep the subject reasonably short, an invitation to a particular event usually does quite well. Again, assuming that that topic is relevant to the audience and there's been some good targeting.